The lake looked frozen, silent, and innocent beneath the Minnesota snow. Sergeant Foster Merrick was only sent to recover an old SUV from under the ice. But inside that vehicle, he found a German Shepherd still alive, waiting where his owner's scent had not faded. The missing woman's file said she had walked away from her life by choice. The dog's eyes told a different story. And before the truth was over, one buried name would lead back to a woman everyone had stopped searching for. Tell us where you're watching from. Share your thoughts. And please like and subscribe to help us reach 5,000 subscribers and keep these stories coming. Winter made Ashwater look cleaner than it had any right to look. Snow lay heavy on the pine branches above Alderwake Road. It softened the roofs of the bait shop, the closed summer cabins, the small post office, and the white steeple at the center of town. Morning light bounced off the frozen lake until the whole shoreline seemed washed in silver. From a distance, Ashwater looked peaceful. Sergeant Foster Merrick had lived there long enough to know peace could be a surface. He parked his cruiser at the old boat launch just after 7. The tires crunched over packed snow, and the breath from the exhaust drifted pale behind him. He sat for one extra second before opening the door, looking past the windshield at Lake Alderwake. The city had lowered the water level that week to repair the spillgate before the deeper freeze set in. Most winters, the lake sealed itself thick and stubborn by late December. This year, the water had dropped beneath the first layer of ice, leaving strange pockets and cloudy shelves along the shoreline. That was how the workers found the metal, a dark corner beneath translucent ice. Foster stepped out into the cold. He was 43, tall and athletic, with broad shoulders that made his dark navy police jacket sit square across his frame. A black tactical vest covered his uniform shirt. His badge caught a pale spark of winter sun. The radio mic, clipped near his shoulder, clicked softly as dispatch checked in with the fire crew. His face was rugged and angular, the kind of face people trusted in emergencies and avoided when they had something to hide. Short dark brown hair showed beneath his black winter cap. Very short stubble shadowed his jaw. His blue-gray eyes moved slowly over the lake, the workers, the rescue sled, the orange cones, and the rectangle of ice already marked for cutting. He did not hurry. Hurrying made people miss edges. A young officer stood near the tape, stamping his boots against the cold while writing in a yellow waterproof notebook. Officer Julian Croft looked too young to be this tired, with dark blonde hair flattened under his cap and a face reddened by wind. He straightened as Foster approached. "Morning, Sergeant." "Plate confirmed?" Julian nodded toward the ice. "Minnesota registration. Eleanor Carrow." The name moved through the air with the quiet weight of something unfinished. Foster looked back at the lake. Eleanor May Carrow had been missing for 4 months. 61 years old. Quilt shop owner. Widow once, remarried later. Known in town for sewing winter blankets for the church drive and correcting people who called patchwork simple. The official report said she had left Ashwater voluntarily after a difficult period at home. Her husband, Gideon Carrow, had told officers Eleanor had been confused, emotional, and determined to start over in Arizona. There were text messages from her phone, a plane ticket bought with her card, a blurry airport clip of a woman in a coat similar to hers. Gideon had also said Eleanor had sold her SUV to a private buyer before leaving. Foster remembered reading the summary. Voluntary departure. No immediate threat indicated. Clean words. Easy words. Now the vehicle was under a Minnesota lake, with Eleanor's plate still on it. "Who spotted it?" Foster asked. "One of the spillgate contractors," Julian said. "Saw a corner through the ice when the water dropped. Thought it was a dock panel at first." Foster walked to the edge of the marked section. Beneath the ice, the shape was hard to read. The lake had blurred it into shadow and glass. But once he knew what he was looking at, he could make out the rear slope of a vehicle roof and part of a back window, pressed beneath the frozen skin of the lake. It bothered him that the vehicle was close to shore. It bothered him more that nobody had found it before. Chief Maris Ellery's voice came over the radio, low and clipped. "Merrick, status." Foster keyed his mic. "Vehicle appears consistent with Carrow SUV. Rescue crew preparing access. No visible occupant from surface. We'll confirm once entry is safe." "Keep it tight," Maris said, "and document everything." Foster almost smiled. That was Maris in 3 words. Keep it tight, do not guess. Do not give anyone a sloppy sentence to twist later. He understood that better than most. 18 months earlier, he had warned against continuing a pursuit during a whiteout. He had said the road surface was turning blind and slick, and the risk had gone past reasonable. The final internal report later stated he had not objected clearly. Not objected clearly. 4 words had followed him longer than the winter bruises from that night. The city repair crew stepped back as the ice rescue team moved in. Chainsaws began to cut, their sound harsh against the still lake. Blocks of ice were lifted away one by one, dragged onto the snow like cloudy blue stones. Cold vapor rose from the dark water beneath. Foster pulled on waterproof gloves and clipped a safety line to his harness. He was not the department's full-time diver. Ashwater did not have one, but he was ice rescue trained, steady under pressure, and stubborn enough to be useful in water that punished mistakes quickly. A firefighter named Dobbs passed him a light. Rear hatch is angled up. Might have an air pocket, or just trapped ice, Foster said. Always the optimist. Optimism doesn't hold a rope. Dobbs gave a short laugh, then went quiet. They lowered Foster onto the rescue platform and slid him toward the opening. The water below was dark, thick with lake silt and fragments of ice. He adjusted his mask and light, checked the line twice, and eased down. Cold closed around him fast. It pressed through the suit, through the gloves, through the careful discipline he wore like another layer of uniform. His breath filled his ears. The world above became muffled, all voices reduced to vibration and rope tension. The SUV appeared slowly. First the rear bumper, then the spare tire cover, then the side window, filmed with cloudy residue. It was wedged at an angle against the shallow shelf near shore, as if it had slid there and settled badly. The back half sat higher than the front, leaving a cramped pocket near the rear seats. Foster swept the light across the driver's side. No face near the wheel, no hand against the glass, no obvious sign of Eleanor. He moved carefully, one gloved hand on the vehicle frame. The front seats were shadowed. The lake distorted everything. Still, he could see enough to notice the driver's seat. Too far back. Eleanor Carrow had been 5'4", according to her file. Foster had read that line twice because details mattered. Whoever had last driven or positioned this SUV had longer legs. He shifted toward the rear passenger window. His light caught a shape. For half a second his mind made it into a blanket, then a bag, then something that had no name because the wrong name would hurt too soon. Then the shape breathed. 2 eyes reflected the beam. Foster went still. Not human. A German shepherd. The dog was trapped low against the back seat, tangled in a cargo net and a twisted strap. Black and tan fur lay wet and clumped against a strong body, gone too thin from cold and hunger. The dark saddle across his back blended into the shadowed cabin. His tan chest rose in shallow, stubborn pulls. One ear stood straight, the other tipped outward slightly at the top. A small cream-colored mark showed at the center of his chest, pale as a thumbprint of light. The dog's amber-brown eyes stayed on Foster. Not wild, not safe. Waiting. Foster's radio crackled. He swallowed once before speaking. Live animal in the rear compartment. German shepherd. Breathing, trapped but conscious. For a moment nobody answered. Then Julian's voice came through, thin with disbelief. Alive? Alive, Foster said. Get Langley here, now. He moved slowly toward the rear door. A frightened dog that size could do damage without meaning to. Foster knew that. He also knew fear was not the same thing as aggression. Easy, he said, though the water swallowed most of the word. I see you. The dog did not bare his teeth. He made one small sound. It was not a bark or a growl. It was old exhaustion shaped into breath. That sound reached Foster more deeply than it should have. It made him think of words trapped in reports. Warnings softened until they became suggestions. People reduced to what someone else wrote when they were not in the room to answer. A living truth sealed behind cold glass while everyone above ground accepted the paperwork. Foster pressed his gloved palm lightly to the window. The dog blinked, not trust, not yet, but permission enough. The door would not open fully. Ice and pressure held it cruelly in place. Foster worked the gap inch by inch, careful not to force the frame and crush the space the animal still had. He cut the cargo net first, then the strap. When his hand brushed the dog's shoulder, the animal flinched but did not snap. Good, Foster murmured. That's good. He slid one arm beneath the dog's chest and another behind the hips. The German Shepherd was heavy with wet fur and cold, but lighter than a dog that Strong should have been. His body trembled once against Foster's arms, then settled. Above, the line tightened. Foster secured the dog to the rescue sling and signaled for ascent. The climb felt slower than any he had made that winter. The cold dragged at them. The door frame snagged once. Foster eased the dog free, jaw tight, refusing to rush the last few feet. When they broke the surface, the morning exploded back into sound. Boots on ice. Men calling, the whine of equipment. Julian saying something under his breath that might have been a prayer. Foster pushed the dog toward the platform first. Hands reached down, careful and quick. A woman in a burgundy winter coat hurried through the tape with a brown medical bag swinging from one hand. Dr. Yvette Langley was short, silver-haired, and broad in the shoulders from decades of wrestling scared animals back toward life. Her cheeks were red from the cold, her pale eyes sharp behind fogged glasses. She dropped to her knees beside the dog before anyone could ask her to wait. "Oh, Argus," she whispered. The name changed the air. Foster pulled himself onto the ice, water running from his sleeves. "You know him?" Yvette did not look away from the dog. She worked fast, checking gums, pulse, limbs, breathing. "Eleanor's dog." Julian crouched nearby with the evidence camera, but hesitated, as if photographing the moment felt wrong. Foster noticed. "Take the pictures." Julian looked at him. "Clean record," Foster said. "For him, too." Julian nodded and lifted the camera. Argus lay on the thermal blanket, eyes half open. Now that Foster saw him in daylight, the dog did not look old by years so much as aged by waiting. His body was muscular beneath the wet fur, trained and disciplined. But the cold had drawn him inward. The black canine-style collar at his neck was worn, scratched, and half hidden under ice-matted hair. Yvette touched the cream mark on his chest with 2 fingers. Her face tightened. "Eleanor would never have left him," she said. Nobody answered right away. The lake gave a soft crack somewhere beneath the rescue platform. A natural shift, nothing dangerous. Still, everyone heard it. Foster looked at the SUV beneath the cut ice. He pictured the report again. Voluntary departure, no immediate threat. Husband stated vehicle sold before departure. The words seemed thinner now. Yvette wrapped Argus tighter. He wasn't in there for 4 months. Foster crouched beside her. "How long?" "Hard to say until I examine him properly. A day, maybe 2. Dehydrated, cold, hungry. But if he'd been trapped since she vanished, we wouldn't be having this conversation." Julian frowned. "Then how did he get into her vehicle now?" Yvette looked toward the ice hole, then back at the dog. "He found it." The answer was simple. That made it worse. Argus had been alive somewhere in Ashwater for months, wandering, waiting, returning to the lake when the water dropped and the buried vehicle breathed out the last scent of the woman who had raised him. A dog did not understand affidavits. A dog did not care about airport footage, text messages, or a husband's careful explanation. A dog remembered where love had gone missing. Foster stood and walked back toward the cut in the ice. The rescue crew had stabilized the SUV enough for a brief exterior check before towing. He leaned close, shining his light through the driver's window again. The seat remained wrong, too far back. The mirror angled too high. Not proof, not even close. But wrong things had a way of standing together when someone finally bothered to look. Chief Maris came over the radio again. "Merrick?" Foster watched the dark SUV under the pale lake. "We have no human occupant visible from initial access," he said. "Recovered 1 live German Shepherd identified as Eleanor Carrow's dog. Vehicle condition raises questions about the original statement." A pause. "Questions how?" Foster turned his head toward Argus. The dog had opened his eyes at the sound of Eleanor's name when Yvette said it again. He was weak, wrapped in silver thermal fabric, but his gaze searched the shoreline as if the right voice might still come walking through the snow. Foster touched the black wristwatch on his left hand, then lowered his fingers to the small silver compass keychain in his pocket. The edge pressed into his palm. "Driver's seat position doesn't match Eleanor's height," he said. "Mirror doesn't either. Vehicle was reportedly sold, but registration still comes back to her." Maris was quiet long enough for the silence to matter. "Document what you can without expanding beyond scene safety," she said. "We do this right." Foster looked at Julian. You heard the chief. Julian was already writing. The SUV did not give them a confession. The ice did not open and offer up an answer. There was no clean ending waiting beneath the lake, no single object that made the whole story simple. There was only a vehicle that should not have been there, a dog that should not have survived, and a file that had begun to loosen at the edges. Yvette and the rescue team lifted Argus onto a heated stretcher. As they carried him toward the waiting truck, one of the firefighters said Eleanor's name softly, asking Yvette whether the dog had truly belonged to her. Argus opened his eyes. His head shifted. Then, with great effort, he reached his muzzle toward Foster's bare wrist, where the glove had pulled back from the sleeve. The touch was cold, damp, and barely there. Foster froze. He had been thanked by victims before, cursed by suspects, ignored by people in shock. He knew how to stand through all of it. But this was different. Argus did not know his name, did not know his rank, did not know the history that made Foster distrust any report too neat to breathe. The dog only seemed to know that someone had finally opened a door. Foster rested 2 fingers lightly against the dog's neck. "Easy, Argus," he said. Argus closed his eyes. Across the lake, winter sunlight struck the broken ice and scattered into hard white fragments. Ashwater still looked peaceful from a distance. The town still looked clean, still looked quiet, still looked like a place where a woman could simply decide to leave, and everyone could accept it, because accepting was easier than asking again. Foster watched the ambulance pull away with the dog. He understood then that he had not pulled a solved case from beneath Lake Alderwake. He had pulled up the first living witness to a story. Ashwater had buried too early, and somewhere beneath all that polished winter brightness, a question had begun to breathe. Dr. Yvette Langley's clinic sat at the far end of a snow-packed service road, tucked behind a feed store that had closed for the winter. The sign above the clinic door was faded green, with one corner bent from years of wind off Lake Alderwake. A row of frozen planters lined the porch, each one buried under a soft cap of snow. Inside, the air was warm enough to fog Foster Merrick's glasses when he stepped through the door. The clinic smelled of antiseptic, wet fur, old coffee, and heated towels. Somewhere behind the reception counter, a dryer hummed steadily, turning blankets over and over as if warmth could be manufactured by stubbornness alone. Argus lay on a padded exam table beneath layers of gray fleece. His black and tan coat had been rinsed just enough for Yvette to see the skin beneath the matted places. A soft collar had replaced the stiff, wet one found on him at the lake. His amber-brown eyes opened now and then, following movement in the room, then closing as if even looking required more strength than he had to spare. Foster stood near the wall, with his arms folded, still in his dark navy uniform. His tactical vest was unzipped now, and his gloves sat on the counter beside Yvette's brown medical bag. He had told himself he was only waiting for an initial veterinary statement. That was the correct reason. It was not the whole reason. Every time Foster shifted toward the door, Argus tried to lift his head. The dog never made it far. His neck would rise an inch, tremble, then settle back into the blanket. Still, the effort reached Foster in a way he did not appreciate. He had spent years training himself not to mistake need for responsibility. A police officer could not personally carry every frightened thing home. That was how judgment bent. That was how reports became soft. But Argus did not ask for softness. He only watched the door. Yvette moved around the table with practiced calm. She was short, silver-haired, and broad in the shoulders, with pale eyes that looked gentle only when they were aimed at animals. With people, they sharpened quickly. She checked Argus's temperature again, adjusted the warming pad, then made a note on a clipboard with handwriting too forceful to be mistaken for uncertainty. "He's dehydrated," she said. "Cold-stressed, hungry, exhausted. Mild inflammation in the rear joints, but that isn't new." "Will he make it?" Foster asked. Yvette looked at Argus before answering. "If he gets through tonight, I like his chances." That was not comfort, exactly. It was an honest door left open. Foster nodded. Yvette pulled the blanket higher around Argus's chest. Her thumb brushed the small cream mark there, the pale shape that had made her say his name on the ice before anyone else knew it. "Eleanor used to call that his candle," she said. Foster looked at her. Yvette kept her eyes on the dog. Said even a serious dog needed one foolish-looking thing, so people wouldn't be too intimidated by him. For the first time that day, Foster could picture Eleanor Carrow as more than a file. Not missing, not unstable, not voluntary. Just a woman in a winter coat, standing in this room, making a dry joke about the bright mark on her dog's chest. "You treated him often?" Foster asked. "For years. Joint checks, vaccines, a paw injury once." Eleanor watched over him like he was made of glass and steel at the same time. Yvette's mouth tightened. She paid for his anti-inflammatory medication before she bought her own refills. One winter she came in with coupons, loose change, and a quilted potholder because she was $8 short. She brought the $8 back the next morning. Foster wrote that down. Yvette gave him a look. "That going in your report? If it helps establish relationship history." "It establishes common sense," she said. Eleanor would not have left him. Common sense did not hold much weight in court. Foster knew that. But sometimes common sense pointed toward the place evidence had been ignored. The bell above the clinic door rang just after 4. A young woman entered with snow in her hair and fear all over her face. She wore a pale blue winter coat over medical scrubs, as if she had driven straight from a shift, and forgotten there was another version of herself beneath the work clothes. Her honey-brown hair was tied low at the back of her neck. One hand gripped a small silver pendant shaped like sewing scissors, pressing it hard enough against her chest that her knuckles blanched. Yvette's face changed. "Sadie." Sadie Carrow did not answer at first. Her eyes found the exam table. The blankets, the dark muzzle, the one ear tipped outward. She took 2 steps into the room and stopped as if the floor had shifted under her. "Argus?" The dog opened his eyes. His tail moved once beneath the blanket. It was barely anything, a faint brush of fabric. But Sadie covered her mouth, and the sound she made did not belong to an adult woman. It belonged to a child who had found something she had been told to stop hoping for. Yvette reached for her, but Sadie was already at the table. She did not throw her arms around the dog. She seemed to understand he was too fragile for that. Instead, she lowered one trembling hand to the edge of the blanket and waited. Argus turned his head until his nose touched her fingers. Sadie bent over him, shoulders shaking silently. Foster looked away, not because grief made him uncomfortable. It did, but that was not the point. Some reunions deserved privacy even when they happened in a room full of witnesses. He stepped closer to the sink and busied himself rinsing lake grit from his wrist. Behind him, Sadie whispered, "I thought she left you too." The words were so quiet, Foster almost missed them. Argus breathed against her hand. Yvette gave Sadie a few minutes before guiding her into the small consultation room off the main exam area. Foster followed only after Sadie nodded that he could. The room held 2 chairs, a metal desk, and a corkboard crowded with vaccination reminders and lost pet flyers. Snow pressed against the lower half of the window outside, blue in the fading light. Sadie sat with both hands around a paper cup of water she did not drink. "I'm Sergeant Merrick," Foster said. "I know." She looked up. Her eyes were green-brown and red-rimmed, but clear. "You pulled him out." "Yes, thank you." There were responses to that, standard ones, professional ones. Foster chose none of them. Yvette stood by the door with her arms crossed. "Tell him what you told me 4 months ago." Sadie's mouth tightened. "I told the department everything I had." "I'm not saying you didn't," Foster said. That seemed to matter to her. For a moment, Sadie only stared at the cup in her hands. Then she touched the little scissors pendant at her throat. "My mother called me the week before she disappeared. I missed it. I was at the clinic in Duluth, helping a patient learn to walk stairs again. By the time I saw the voicemail, it was late." She swallowed. "I thought she was just upset." "Upset about what?" "Gideon, the lake property, money, her memory, everything." Sadie gave a small, bitter laugh with no humor in it. That's how he talked about her. Like she had become a weather problem he had to manage. Foster did not interrupt. Sadie pulled out her phone. Her thumb hovered over the screen. "I gave this to the first officer. They said it didn't prove anything. May I hear it?" She nodded and pressed play. Eleanor Carrow's voice came through small and thin, carrying the soft rasp of age and worry. "Sadie, honey, it's Mom. I don't want you driving up here unless I ask, all right? I'm fixing some paperwork about the lake house. Nothing dramatic. I know Gideon will say I'm confused, but don't let him explain me to you. And if Argus keeps going back somewhere, pay attention. That dog remembers the road better than people remember promises." The message ended. No one moved. Outside the consultation room, the dryer kept humming. A normal sound, a domestic sound. It made the silence after Eleanor's voice feel worse. Sadie stared at the phone as if the answer might appear if she kept looking. "I was angry at her." Foster's voice stayed low. "For leaving? For making it believable." Sadie pressed her lips together. Gideon kept saying she was tired, that she had been saying odd things, that she wanted sun, quiet, distance. He said she loved me, but loving me had started to exhaust her. I hated him for saying it, and then I hated myself because part of me believed him. Yvette's expression hardened. Foster looked at the phone. The voicemail did not prove a crime. It did not identify a suspect. It did not say Eleanor had been taken anywhere against her will. But it did something official language often refused to do. It let Eleanor speak for herself. Before Foster could ask more, the bell at the front door rang again. The clinic changed. Yvette heard it first in the way Argus moved. The dog's breathing shifted. His paws flexed beneath the blanket. A low tension passed through the exam room like a wire pulled tight. Foster stepped out of the consultation room. A man stood near the front counter, removing black leather gloves finger by finger. Gideon Royce Carrow looked like the sort of man Ashwater trusted because he had learned the town's preferred shape of sorrow. He was in his 60s, trim beneath a charcoal wool coat, silver at the temples, with polished shoes far too clean for the parking lot outside. His face was long, composed, and carefully wounded. His eyes moved from Foster's uniform to Yvette's stiff posture, then to Sadie. "Sadie," he said softly. "I came as soon as I heard." Sadie did not answer. Gideon looked past her into the exam room. "And there he is." Argus did not lift his head toward the voice. He lowered it. Foster noticed the change at once. Not dramatic, not useful in a report, but real. The dog's body compressed into the blanket, muscles tight beneath the damp fur. Gideon stepped forward. "Argus." The dog's ears flattened. Yvette moved between him and the table. "He's not ready for visitors." "I'm not a visitor," Gideon said. "He's my wife's dog." "Then you know he nearly didn't survive today." Gideon inclined his head. "I'm grateful he was recovered." Recovered, there it was. Foster looked at him more closely. Gideon turned, offering his hand. "Sergeant Merrick, thank you for retrieving the vehicle." "And the dog, of course." Foster shook his hand. Gideon's grip was dry, measured, brief. "We rescued him," Foster said. A flicker passed over Gideon's face. It might have been annoyance. It might have been nothing. "Of course," Gideon said. "Rescued." Sadie's voice came from behind Yvette. "You said Mom sold the SUV." Gideon sighed, not with surprise but with disappointment. "Sadie, this is not the place. It was under the lake. I heard. Still registered to her." Gideon's eyes softened in the exact way a person might soften for an audience. "Your mother made many impulsive decisions in those final weeks. She may have failed to complete the transfer. That would not be unusual." Foster said nothing. Gideon looked back at Argus. "When Dr. Langley clears him, I'll take him home. Familiar surroundings will be best." "No," Sadie said. The word came out sharper than she expected. She looked almost startled by herself. Gideon's expression did not change, but his right thumb moved across the silver signet ring on his hand. "Grief is making this harder than it needs to be," he said. Yvette's pale eyes narrowed. "Medical clearance is my decision." "For now," Gideon said gently. That was the threat, not loud, not crude. Just a small door opened in the floor. Foster had heard men threaten in alleys, kitchens, parking lots, and interview rooms. Gideon's version was neater. It wore good wool and smelled faintly of expensive aftershave. Argus shifted under the blanket. His head turned away from Gideon and toward Foster's black boots. With visible effort, the dog pushed his muzzle down until it touched the leather near Foster's foot. The room noticed. Sadie drew in a breath. Yvette's jaw set. Gideon saw it too, and for the first time his careful sorrow thinned at the edges. "He's been through a lot," Gideon said. Old responses, confusion. Dogs attached strangely under stress. "He's 5, Yvette said. Gideon blinked. "Not old," she added, tired. "There's a difference." Foster kept his hand near his duty belt, but relaxed. There was no reason to escalate. Gideon had done nothing in that room except speak politely, and claim what the paperwork likely allowed him to claim. That was the trouble. Paper could sound reasonable while a living thing shook beside it. "I'll need to include his condition in the report," Foster said. "Of course." Gideon smiled faintly. "Reports matter." Foster met his eyes. "They do when they're complete." The smile faded just a little. No one spoke for several seconds. Then Gideon put his gloves back on. "I'll return when emotions are lower. Sadie, please call me when you're ready to talk like family." He left without raising his voice. The bell rang once behind him. Only after his car pulled away did Argus exhale. The sound was long, unsteady, almost human in its relief. He let his head sink fully onto Foster's boot, as though the polished man's absence had returned weight to the room. Sadie stared at the door. "He always sounds reasonable." Foster looked down at Argus. "That's different from being right." Sadie turned toward him then, and something in her face changed. Not trust, not yet, but the beginning of a decision. "The lake property belonged to my mother before she married him," she said. "My grandparents left it to her. Gideon wanted it for his resort project. She said no for years. Then, before she disappeared, she started asking me strange questions about power of attorney, signatures, and whether someone could prove you were confused just because you disagreed with them." Foster felt the case shift, not into certainty, into shape. He had come to the clinic to check on a dog and collect a veterinary statement. He left with Eleanor's voice in his head, Gideon's careful words in his notebook, and the pressure of Argus's muzzle still remembered against his boot. Outside, evening snow had started again, light and bright under the parking lot lamps. The town looked gentle through it. Window lights glowed. Smoke rose from chimneys. Somewhere in Ashwater, people were making dinner and assuming Eleanor Carrow had chosen another life. Foster stood beside his cruiser and looked back at the clinic door. He no longer saw this as a woman who had simply walked away. He saw a story someone else had been allowed to tell for too long. By morning, the lake had gone quiet again. From the second-floor briefing room of the Ashwater Police Department, Foster Merrick could see the white line of Alderwake through the courthouse windows. The ice looked unbroken from that distance, clean, harmless, as if it had not given back a missing woman's SUV and a living German Shepherd the day before. He stood at the end of the long table with his report open in front of him. Chief Maris Ellery sat across from him, reading with her steel-framed glasses low on her nose. Her short black and silver hair was tucked neatly behind one ear, and her command jacket hung on the back of her chair. She did not rush when she read. Maris believed bad decisions often came from people trying to look decisive too early. Officer Julian Croft sat near the window with his yellow waterproof notebook open. His pen had not stopped moving since Foster began. Foster listed the points without drama. The SUV remained registered to Eleanor Carrow. Gideon Carrow had stated she sold it privately before leaving Ashwater. The driver's seat and mirror did not fit Eleanor's height. The airport footage did not clearly show Eleanor's face. Sadie Carrow had preserved a voicemail in which Eleanor mentioned paperwork, the lake property, and not letting Gideon explain her. Argus had returned to the SUV months after Eleanor vanished, and the dog's condition showed he had only been trapped there recently. None of it proved a crime. Foster said that before Maris could. "It proves the original file is thinner than it should be," he finished. Maris removed her glasses. That was never a casual gesture from her. Gideon Carrow has friends on the council. Julian looked down at his notebook. Foster did not. "That doesn't change the vehicle." "No," Maris said, "but it changes how much room people will give us to be wrong." Foster understood. Ashwater was small enough for every investigation to become a weather system. A careless word at the diner could reach City Hall before lunch. Gideon owned offices, sponsored charity auctions, paid for the ice rink lights one year when the town budget came up short. People did not like imagining danger in a man whose name had been printed on thank-you banners. Maris leaned back. "If we reopen this on instinct, he'll say we're harassing a grieving husband." "Then we don't reopen it on instinct." Foster slid a second page across the table. "We ask for a limited warrant, vehicle only, interior compartments connected to ownership, recent operation, or documents related to the missing person report. No broad fishing." Maris read the page. For a moment, The only sound in the room was the heater ticking under the window. Julian finally said, "Sergeant, if the judge says no, then we don't touch it." He hated the answer because it was the right one. 18 months ago, the report that followed the winter pursuit had taught Foster what happened when the record did not hold the full weight of reality. But that lesson could not become an excuse to bend rules now. If he touched Eleanor's SUV without clean authority, Gideon would not need to explain the truth. He would only need to point at Foster's mistake. Maris watched him as if she had heard the thought. "Good," she said, "because if there's something there, I don't want it ruined by impatience." The warrant came through just after noon. Not wide, not generous, but enough. By then, the SUV had been moved to the county vehicle hold, a low concrete building behind the public works yard where snowplows slept between storms. The Carrow vehicle sat under a temporary canopy, still streaked with lake mud and frozen slush. Meltwater dripped from the frame onto the floor in slow, steady taps. The sound made the whole place feel like a clock. Julian photographed the exterior from every angle. A county evidence technician named Mara Bell, a quiet woman in a gray knit cap, with a ruler tucked behind one ear, marked the scene with numbered cards. She did not say much, and Foster liked that. People who worked carefully did not need to narrate themselves. Sadie stood several yards back near the open bay door. She wore a slate blue parka over her scrubs, and her small silver scissors pendant rested outside the coat, as if she had forgotten to tuck it away. Her face was pale from lack of sleep, but steadier than it had been at the clinic. She had come because the warrant allowed her to identify personal property if needed. Foster had warned her this might be slow and disappointing. Sadie had answered, "Slow is fine. 4 months was worse." Yvette Langley arrived with Argus in the back of her clinic SUV. Foster met her near the entrance before she could unload him. He shouldn't be here as a search dog. Yvette looked offended enough to bite him herself. He's here because he became restless the second the tow truck passed the clinic road. He nearly pulled an IV stand over trying to get to the window. "That doesn't change what I said. I know what evidence contamination means, Sergeant." Foster held her gaze. Yvette's expression softened by half an inch. "He stays leashed. He doesn't enter the vehicle. You document that. Everybody wins." Argus stepped down carefully onto the concrete. He looked stronger than he had the day before, but not well. The black and tan coat had dried clean enough to show the dark saddle across his back and the warm tan along his chest and legs. A black collar sat against his neck. The cream mark on his chest showed clearly now, small and bright against the darker fur. When he saw the SUV, he stopped. He did not bark. He did not pull. His whole body simply aimed itself toward the vehicle, as if every line of muscle remembered a path the people in the room could not see. Sadie whispered, "Argus." The dog glanced at her, then back at the SUV. Foster felt the room tighten around that silence. He turned to Julian. "Photograph his position." Julian blinked. Foster kept his voice level. "We document what happens, and we document what we don't use." Julian raised the camera. The search took 40 minutes before it gave them anything beyond mud, receipts too damaged to read, a pair of winter gloves, and a cracked plastic coffee lid in the side compartment. There was no dramatic discovery in the glove box, no confession tucked behind the visor, no single object waiting politely to explain 4 months of absence. Foster preferred it that way. Real answers rarely came arranged for the camera. Julian crouched in the rear cargo area, studying the floor around the spare tire well. "Sergeant." Foster moved closer but did not step into Julian's space. "What do you have?" "Maybe nothing. Show me maybe." Julian pointed with the end of his penlight. Along one corner of the cargo mat near the left wheel well, a thin line of adhesive had dried beneath the lake residue. It was almost invisible unless the light caught it flat. The mat should have lifted easily there. It did not. Mara leaned in, camera already raised. "That's not factory." Foster glanced toward Argus. The dog had lowered his head. His nose hovered in the air, not reaching the vehicle, only facing that same corner. His ears stood high, the right tip angled outward. He looked neither excited nor frightened. He looked certain. Foster stepped back. "Photos first," he said. "Wide, mid, close. Then note the dog's distance from the vehicle and the fact that no command was given. Sadie looked at him then, and something like gratitude crossed her face. Not because he was making it easier. Because he was making it harder in the correct way. Mara photographed everything. Julian changed gloves. Foster read the warrant language once more before allowing the mat to be lifted. The adhesive pulled with a soft tearing sound. Beneath the cargo mat lay a thin metal plate, painted the same dark gray as the surrounding floor. It had been fitted with care. Not professionally, perhaps, but patiently. Julian did not touch it until Mara had marked and photographed the edges. Foster felt his own pulse slow. Some discoveries were loud. This one was quiet enough to be frightening. The plate came free with gentle pressure from a trim tool. Beneath it sat a waterproof pouch wrapped in 2 freezer bags and sealed with clear tape. Sadie took one step forward, then stopped herself. Mara lifted the pouch into an evidence tray. The plastic had clouded from cold and moisture, but the contents inside looked mostly intact. There was handwriting on the outer layer. Sadie made a small sound when she saw it. Foster did not ask. He already knew. A daughter knew her mother's hand before any expert confirmed it. Inside the pouch were papers, folded flat and protected with the care of someone who had expected water, hiding, or both. Mara separated them one at a time. A revocation of financial power of attorney naming Gideon Carrow. A copy of the lake property deed. A handwritten note in Eleanor's careful script. Signature on draft transfer is not mine. Right hand hurt that week. Ask Adriana. A list of 3 private care facilities. A small bank key taped to an index card. A business card for Adriana Celeste Wells, attorney at law, elder rights, and estate protection. Then the letter. It was folded separately. Sadie looked at Foster. May I? Mara hesitated. Foster said, after it's photographed. She can view it without touching. They waded through the necessary steps. Each second made Sadie's breathing shallower, but she did not complain. When Mara finally placed the letter under a clear evidence sleeve, Sadie leaned over it as if standing at the edge of a well. My Sadie, if you are reading this, it means I waited too long to tell you everything. I am sorry for that. I thought I could fix the papers quietly and spare you the ugliness. That was pride, not protection. Gideon wants people to believe I am confused. I am frightened, but I am not confused. There is a difference. I forget small things sometimes. I do not forget what belongs to me. I do not forget what your grandparents built. I do not forget my own daughter. If anyone says I chose to leave you without saying goodbye, do not accept it just because the words are written neatly. Trust Argus. He knows when I am afraid. Sadie pressed both hands to her mouth. No one in the bay spoke. Not Julian, not Yvette, not even Maris, who had arrived quietly during the discovery and now stood near the canopy with her coat collar turned up against the cold. For Foster, the letter did something the SUV had not done. It brought Eleanor into the room, not as a possible victim, not as an unstable woman in a file, as a mother trying to leave a lantern behind in case the house went dark. Sadie did not collapse. Her eyes filled, but her spine straightened. She didn't leave me, she said. Yvette reached for her, but Sadie shook her head once, not refusing comfort, only refusing to disappear inside it. Foster looked down at the documents. Still not enough. The thought came automatically, professionally, almost cruelly. The papers did not prove Gideon had caused Eleanor's disappearance. They did not prove where she had gone. They did not prove the airport footage was staged or the texts false. But they proved Eleanor had been preparing to resist, and they proved the old explanation no longer deserved the comfort of being called simple. Back at the station, Foster contacted Adriana Wells through the number on the card. Her voice on speaker was calm, precise, and alert within seconds. She did not waste time asking whether Eleanor was safe. Perhaps lawyers in her field learned not to ask questions the world had not yet earned the right to answer. Yes, Adriana said. Mrs. Carrow contacted me. She wanted to revoke financial authority granted to her husband, prevent any transfer of the lake property, and obtain an independent capacity evaluation. Maris stood beside the desk, arms folded. Did she allege criminal conduct? She alleged pressure, Adriana said. She alleged misrepresentation. She alleged that her concerns were being reframed as confusion. I will not improve her words after the fact, Chief. But I will say this. She sounded careful, not incoherent. Foster wrote that down exactly. Careful, not incoherent. Yvette added one more piece before leaving. Eleanor had visited the clinic the same week. Some of the property documents were dated. She had slipped on the back steps of the quilt shop and sprained her right wrist. Yvette had helped wrap it because Eleanor refused to go to urgent care over what she called a foolish old stumble. "You documented it?" Foster asked. Yvette gave him a flat look. "I document animals, Sergeant. I can certainly document humans when they bleed on my counter." The word landed harder than she meant it to, and she seemed to realize it. "It was minor," she added, but her writing hand was swollen. She could barely sign the clinic receipt. Maris looked at the copy of the transfer draft. The signature was smooth. Too smooth, maybe. Maybe not. But maybe had become a room full of doors. Near evening, the documents were sealed, logged, and placed into evidence. Sadie stood beside the table, looking at the pouch through plastic. Argus rested on a blanket near Yvette's boots, tired from the outing but unwilling to sleep. Foster allowed Sadie one last look at the letter before it went into storage. She did not touch it. She only leaned close enough to read the final line again. "Trust Argus." The dog lifted his head when she whispered his name. Sadie knelt beside him, holding her wrist near his nose. Argus leaned forward and breathed in, softly, as if searching for someone else on her skin. Then he rested his muzzle over the small silver scissors pendant that had slipped from her coat and onto her palm. Sadie closed her fingers around the pendant. "He remembers her," she said. Foster looked toward the evidence locker, then back at the dog. Argus had not solved anything by magic. He had not pointed like an arrow or performed for the room. He had only gone back to the place Eleanor's hands had been. And in a world where too many people had accepted the version written by someone else, that simple act of remembering had become the first honest statement anyone could not easily edit. The day after the papers were found in Eleanor Carrow's SUV, Ashwater did not feel smaller. It felt watched. Foster Merrick sensed it before anyone said anything. At the gas station, conversations dipped when his cruiser rolled past the pumps. At the diner window, two men in quilted jackets turned their coffee cups slowly and pretended not to look. Outside City Hall, a woman Foster had known since high school gave him a polite nod that did not reach her eyes. In a town like Ashwater, suspicion traveled faster than snowplows. Inside the police department, suspicion moved more quietly. It came in the form of copied files, logged searches, public records requests, and a young officer who had stopped trusting simple conclusions. Julian Croft took over the first round of document review because Foster asked him to, and Maris approved it. That mattered. Foster could guide. He could read what was lawfully pulled. He could write supplemental notes. But he would not pretend the case belonged to him simply because Argus had placed his muzzle on his boot. The records room sat behind the old municipal court office, where the carpet had worn thin in a path between the filing cabinets and the copier. A metal fan moved stale air around without improving it. Boxes from retired cases lined one wall. Snowlight came through a narrow window and turned the dust silver. Julian sat at a folding table with his yellow waterproof notebook open, a laptop beside him, and 3 legal pads marked with different colors of tape. Foster stood near the door, arms folded, watching the process rather than pushing it. "Start with Leland Strake," he said. Julian nodded. "Capacity evaluations, guardianship references, property transfers, elder welfare notes. Any civil filings where his name appears near a financial change. Not because we know he did something, because his name appears in Eleanor's hidden documents." Foster almost smiled. "Good." Julian was careful in a way older officers sometimes mistook for nervousness. He read slowly, copied case numbers twice, and wrote down where he found each fact. Foster respected that. Reckless confidence ruined more investigations than fear ever did. The first name surfaced shortly before lunch. Margaret Duvain, 67, widow, former owner of Duvain Bait and Tackle near Lake Kestrel. No children. One nephew in Montana listed as distant family. Her file said she had chosen to leave Minnesota for Florida after deciding the winters were too hard on her joints. Julian read the summary aloud, then frowned. "What?" "The nephew's statement is weird." Foster moved closer. Julian turned the screen. "It says he confirmed Margaret had mentioned Florida before. But there's no note that anyone verified she arrived there. No address, no welfare contact. No call with her after departure. Property? Julian clicked through the county database. Sold 4 months later. Under market value. Buyer was North Shore Renewal Group. Foster looked at him. Julian had already written the name on his pad. Same development group linked to Gideon's resort proposal. The room seemed to tighten. One woman did not make a pattern. Foster knew that. One thin file could be laziness, not corruption. One property sale could be coincidence. Julian kept searching. By mid-afternoon, the second name came up. Pauline Mercer Shaw, 63, retired librarian. Lived alone in a white house north of the Methodist Cemetery. Known for organizing the town's winter book drive and refusing to replace handwritten checkout cards until the library board forced her to. Her file said she had shown signs of cognitive decline, granted financial authority to a distant cousin, and voluntarily moved into a care residence outside the state. Julian stopped reading. Foster saw it in his face. "What did you find?" Julian's throat moved. The cousin listed as her emergency contact died 9 months before the date on the power of attorney. For a moment, the fan in the corner sounded too loud. Foster looked at the screen, then at Julian's notes, then back at the screen. "Print that page," he said, "and log the source." Julian's fingers hesitated over the keyboard. "Sergeant, how does that get missed?" The honest answer was too large for the room, because sometimes nobody wanted to spend 1 more hour on a lonely person's file. Because a woman without loud relatives was easy to place in the category of probably fine. Because official sentences gave tired people permission to stop asking. Foster only said, "By moving too fast." Julian printed the page. That became the moment the case changed inside the department, even before it changed on paper. Not because they had proof of a crime, they did not, but because the old explanation had begun to look less like an isolated mistake and more like a road someone had driven before. They carried the copies upstairs to Maris. The chief listened without interrupting. She stood by the window of her office, one hand on the back of her chair, glasses in the other. Outside, the town square glowed under fresh snow. Children from the elementary school were building a lopsided snowman near the library steps. It was a cruelly beautiful day for ugly paperwork. 3 women, Maris said at last. 3 properties, Julian added. 3 departures marked voluntary or family directed. Leon Strakes appears near each file. Foster said, "Gideon is directly tied to Eleanor and indirectly tied to Margaret through the development group. Pauline's property transfer may also connect, but Julian hasn't finished tracing that." Maris looked at him. "You're being careful with the language. I'm trying to keep the case alive." She put her glasses back on. "Keep trying." By 5 o'clock, Gideon Carrow had learned enough to understand the wind had shifted. His answer arrived as a PDF. It came through city administration, copied to Chief Ellery, the city attorney, and the mayor's office. The subject line was clean, almost boring. Formal complaint regarding Sergeant Foster Merrick. Maris read it first. Then she called Foster into her office and shut the door. He knew before she spoke. The complaint accused him of overstepping his authority, creating suspicion around a grieving husband, influencing Sadie Carrow during an emotionally vulnerable time, and giving inappropriate weight to the reactions of a dog. It claimed Foster had allowed his unresolved frustration over a prior internal incident to affect his judgment in the Carrow matter. The prior incident was not named. It did not have to be. Not objected clearly. 4 words returned to Foster with the clean cruelty of a stamp. Maris watched his face. "Say something?" Foster looked at the final paragraph again. Gideon requested that Foster be removed from any investigative function involving the Carrow family, related property matters, or custody decisions regarding Argus. "He writes well," Foster said. Maris did not smile. "That isn't funny. I didn't mean it to be." The complaint did not shout. That was what made it dangerous. It folded accusation into concern. It asked whether Foster's empathy for the animal had compromised his neutrality. It praised the department while warning against individual emotional overreach. It made Gideon sound reasonable and Foster sound like a man who might care too much. Paper could cut without raising its voice. "I'm not saying he gets what he wants," Maris said, "but City Legal is advising we limit your direct handling of evidence until review." Foster looked up. The office was warm, but he felt the lake cold again. "You're pulling me. I'm protecting the case. Same result. Not the same reason. Foster wanted to argue. The old anger rose quickly, familiar and useless. It told him he had seen this before. A warning softened. A record shaped by someone who arrived late but wrote first. A man made smaller by the version typed about him. He put the anger down because Maris was not Gideon. How limited? He asked. No more evidence handling connected to Gideon. No witness contact without approval. Julian continues public records under my supervision. You stay available for scene context and the original recovery report. Foster nodded once. Maris leaned forward. This is not me doubting you. I know. But knowing did not make it painless. By the next morning, the story had reached the local paper. The Ashwater Ledger did not accuse Foster of misconduct. It was too careful for that. The headline only asked a question. Was Carrow case reopened too quickly? The article mentioned the recovered SUV, the German Shepherd, the hidden documents, and Gideon's concern that grief and speculation might be turning a private family matter into public suspicion. It also referred to a previous disagreement involving Sergeant Merrick's judgment during a winter pursuit review. Foster read it on his phone in the parking lot outside Yvette's clinic. Snow fell gently around the cruiser. For a few seconds, he did nothing. Then he locked the screen and went inside. Argus was stronger that day. Still tired, still under observation, but alert enough to stand when Foster entered. The dog wore his black collar, the metal tag catching the clinic light. His tail did not wag. Argus was not a cheerful dog by nature. He simply looked at Foster as if he had been expecting him. Yvette was at the counter sorting medication packets. You saw the paper? Yes. Lies? Not exactly. That's worse. Foster looked at her. Yvette snapped a label onto a bottle. A lie stands in the middle of the road and dares you to hit it. Not exactly lets people walk around it and say they never saw anything. Sadie sat on the floor beside Argus, one hand resting lightly on his shoulder. She looked as if she had slept badly and decided not to apologize for it. Gideon filed for custody, she said. Foster had known it was coming. Still, the words landed hard. Yvette's voice sharpened. He filed to take possession of Argus as marital property. He's not property, Sadie said. In your heart, no, Yvette said. In paperwork, we have a problem. Foster crouched a few feet from Argus, not touching him yet. Medical hold? For now, Yvette said. He is not cleared for release. That buys time, not certainty. Sadie looked at Foster. Can you stop him? There were easier answers. Kinder ones, false ones. No, Foster said. Sadie's face tightened. I can request delay, he continued. Maris can document the active investigation. Yvette can provide medical grounds. You can challenge custody through the proper channel. But I can't just decide Gideon doesn't get him. Argus stepped away from Sadie and lowered his head against Foster's knee. The room went still, not because it proved anything, because everyone in it wished it could. Foster rested one hand on the dog's neck. We keep it clean, he said, though he was not sure whether he meant the case, the custody fight, or himself. Late that afternoon, Julian came looking for him. He found Foster in the station garage, checking winter kits in the cruisers because it was useful work and did not require anyone's permission. Foster was restocking thermal blankets when Julian appeared between the vehicles with his notebook held too tightly. Sergeant. Foster looked up. Julian's face was pale in a way that had nothing to do with the weather. I was tracing Eleanor's insurance records, not financial, medical. Foster closed the cruiser trunk slowly. Julian, you should take this to Chief Ellery. I did. She said to show you because it touches your original report. That was Maris threading a needle, not bringing Foster back in, not shutting him out of context. Julian opened the folder. 2 weeks after Eleanor was supposedly in Arizona, her insurance was billed at a private care facility. Foster felt the garage around him grow quiet. Where? Haven Ridge Memory Residence, near the North Dakota line, more than 300 miles from here. Under Eleanor Carrow? Julian shook his head. No, that's why it didn't flag. He turned the page. The patient name is E. Fenwick. Foster stared at the line. Fenwick, Julian said, voice lower now, was Eleanor's maiden name. For several seconds, Foster did not move. All week, the case had been built around absence. A woman who left, a woman who may have been taken, a woman whose property, dog and voice suggested she had not chosen the story written for her. But this was different. This was not a hidden letter or a wrong seat position. This was a trace of a living person in a place no one had been told to look. Foster took the page carefully, as if holding it too tightly might make it vanish. The question changed there in the garage, under fluorescent lights, between cruisers loaded for snow emergencies. Not where had Eleanor gone, not what had Gideon done, but who had decided Eleanor Carrow should no longer be found under her own name. For almost a minute, no one in the garage spoke. The fluorescent lights hummed above the cruisers. Snowmelt dripped from the wheel wells onto the concrete. Somewhere near the open bay door, a mechanic's radio played a weather update in a voice too cheerful for the room. Foster Merrick stood with Julian Croft's printed page in his hand and read the same line again. Havenridge Memory Residence. Patient name, E. Fenwick. Insurance billed 2 weeks after Eleanor Carrow was supposedly in Arizona. Fenwick, Eleanor's maiden name. It did not prove she was alive. It did not prove she had been taken there. It did not prove who arranged it or why. Foster knew all of that. He had spent his adult life teaching younger officers the difference between a lead and a conclusion, but his body reacted before his training could slow it. A missing woman's name had moved. Not under the name people were searching. Under the name someone hoped no one would think to ask for. Chief Maris Ellery brought everyone into the small conference room within 10 minutes. Julian laid out the medical billing record, the copy of Eleanor's birth certificate, the hidden documents from the SUV, and Adriana Wells' confirmation that Eleanor had planned to challenge Gideon's authority. Sadie Carrow arrived 20 minutes later with her coat half-zipped and her hair coming loose from its low tie. She had driven from Yvette's clinic too fast and walked into the room with the desperate focus of a person who had found a door in a wall. "Where is it?" she asked. Maris did not answer quickly enough. Sadie looked at Foster. "Where is the place?" "Havenridge Memory Residence," he said, "near the North Dakota line." Sadie turned toward the door. "I'm going." Foster stepped in front of her without touching her. No, the word hit harder than he intended. Sadie stopped. Her face changed from panic to anger so fast it was almost a relief. Anger had more balance than terror. "My mother could be there." "She could," Foster said. "Then move. If you go there alone, you may give them time to move records. Call Gideon, change her location, or claim you caused a disturbance." Sadie's eyes filled, but she did not blink. "So I'm supposed to sit here because the people who lost her the first time need more paperwork?" Foster had no clean answer. That was when the state investigator arrived. Naomi Creel entered without drama, carrying a slim black case and wearing a dark gray field jacket dusted with snow. She was 45, medium tall, composed with dark eyes that moved across the room once and seemed to place every person in it. Her badge was clipped at her belt, visible but not displayed like a shield. She shook Maris's hand first, then Foster's, then Julian's. When she turned to Sadie, her voice softened by a precise degree. "Mrs. Carrow, I'm Naomi Creel with the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension. I know you want to leave right now." Sadie's jaw tightened. "Wouldn't you?" "Yes." The honesty cut through the room. Naomi set her case on the table. "And if it were my mother, I would need someone to stop me from doing the first thing my grief told me to do." Sadie looked away. Naomi continued, not unkindly. "If Eleanor Carrow is at Havenridge under another name, the safest way to reach her is not to knock on the front desk and announce what we know. We need records preserved. We need legal authority. We need to know who placed her there, who paid, who restricted contact, and what story staff were given." Sadie whispered, "She could think I stopped looking." No one answered right away. Foster felt those words settle into him. There were sentences no report could carry properly. Naomi pulled out a chair. "Then we work quickly, but we work clean." The room shifted around that, not toward comfort, toward action. Havenridge looked kind on its website. Maris projected the page onto the conference room screen. A bright banner showed a pale brick building surrounded by evergreens. In the photos, older residents sat near big windows, with puzzles, teacups, and folded blankets. Staff members smiled with the gentle confidence of people paid to look patient. The words on the homepage were warm enough to feel rehearsed. Memory care with dignity. Family-centered support. A peaceful residence for changing seasons. Julian stared at the screen. "That doesn't look like a place that hides people." Naomi did not look away from the website. Places rarely do. Adriana Wells joined by video call from her office in Minneapolis. She wore a navy blazer and copper-framed glasses, and her calm was not cold. It was built, Foster thought, from years of standing beside people whose fear had been called confusion by someone with better paperwork. "I found the civil records," Adriana said. Eleanor May Carrow was born Eleanor May Fenwick, the name E. Fenwick would not trigger a simple missing person check unless someone knew to search her maiden name. Maris leaned forward. "Can Havenridge confirm whether E. Fenwick is there?" "They refused," Naomi said. "Privacy law." Which, by itself, is not suspicious. Facilities should not hand out patient information to anyone who calls. Adriana added, "But the timing is concerning." E. Fenwick was admitted the same week Eleanor disappeared. Sadie pressed both hands flat on the table as if the room had begun to tilt. "What else?" Foster asked. Adriana glanced at Naomi, then continued. The intake contact listed Gideon Carrow as health representative. Leland Strake provided a capacity letter stating the patient could not reliably manage financial or placement decisions. Julian's pen stopped. Naomi opened another file. There is also a notation advising staff not to accept calls from Sadie Carrow without Gideon's approval. Sadie's face went empty. That was worse than crying. "What reason?" she asked. Naomi did not soften the answer into something it was not. "It says contact with you caused emotional agitation and could increase confusion." Sadie laughed once. It was small and broken. "He turned me into a symptom." Foster looked down at his hands. He had heard people described badly in reports before. Uncooperative, emotional, confused, combative, difficult. Words that sometimes described behavior and sometimes only described inconvenience. But Sadie's sentence named the cruelty more plainly than any legal phrase could. "He turned me into a symptom." Naomi placed a small silver recorder in the middle of the table and clicked it on. "From this point forward, every call, every refusal, every record request is logged." She looked at Foster. "You recovered the SUV. You built much of the initial timeline. But because of the complaint, I need you outside direct witness contact unless I request you." Foster nodded before his pride could object. Sadie looked at him, surprised. "You're just accepting that?" "I'm accepting the part that keeps your mother's case from getting thrown sideways. It cost him to say it. Maybe that was why it mattered." The next piece of the puzzle came from a man named Warren Pell. He arrived at the department that evening, smelling of diesel, cold air, and convenience store coffee. Warren was in his mid-50s, big through the shoulders and soft through the middle, with a short salt and pepper beard and tired blue eyes that avoided the walls as if every posted notice might accuse him. His orange tow company jacket was stained at the cuffs. A tiny metal tow truck hung from his key ring and clicked nervously against his palm. Naomi interviewed him with Maris present. Foster watched from behind the one-way glass, arms folded, silent because that was all he was allowed to be. Warren said Gideon had called him late one night 4 months earlier. The SUV was at the Carrow house. Gideon told him Eleanor no longer needed it, that it had mechanical issues, and that it had to be moved before she left town for good. Warren had asked whether there was paperwork. Gideon said it was a private family matter and paid cash. "Did you take it to the lake?" Naomi asked. Warren looked up fast. "No, Mom. Where did you take it?" "A storage lot north of town. One of those properties under North Shore Renewal. A man met me there." "Name?" Warren rubbed his forehead. "I don't know. Thin fella. Gray coat. Had papers on a clipboard. Said he worked with Strake's office on property management. Did that seem unusual?" At the time, Warren's key ring clicked faster. "Everything rich people do seems unusual if you tow cars for a living." Naomi let the silence sit. Warren swallowed. "I should ask more." "Yes," Naomi said. There was no cruelty in it. That made it worse. When Warren left, the theory changed shape again. The SUV had not vanished by accident. Someone had moved it out of Eleanor's life. Naomi would not call it staged. Not yet, but she laid out the possible logic in careful pieces. Gideon may have wanted the vehicle available later, perhaps to support a story of confusion, flight, or misadventure. The lake had frozen early. The water level shifted. The vehicle settled where no one found it until winter work exposed it. A plan did not have to succeed completely to reveal intent. And Argus had been the variable no one controlled. After Eleanor disappeared, sightings of the German Shepherd had been scattered across Ashwater, near the shuttered summer cabins, behind the old bait shop, along the road to Eleanor's lake property. A retired teacher had fed him twice and thought he belonged to hunters. A teenager had seen him near the boat launch and posted a blurry photo online with the caption, "Anybody missing this guy?" Nobody connected the sightings. Why would they? The file said Eleanor had left. The dog had become a stray detail in a story people thought was over. At Yvette's clinic that night, Foster found Argus lying near the front door. The dog's body was stronger now, but his eyes remained fixed westward whenever the door opened. Beyond that door lay the highway out of Ashwater. Beyond the highway, miles of winter road. Beyond that, perhaps, Haven Ridge. Yvette was asleep in the office chair with a blanket over her shoulders. A lamp burned low near the counter. Sadie had gone home only because Naomi ordered her to sleep before she made herself sick. Foster lowered himself to the floor beside Argus. For a while, he said nothing. The dog breathed steadily, muzzle on his paws, ears relaxed but not careless. Foster thought about Eleanor in some room with the wrong name on her chart. He thought about Sadie being reduced to a source of agitation. He thought about Warren Pell admitting he should have asked more. He thought about his own report from 18 months ago, where a warning had been trimmed until it no longer stood up. There were many ways to make a person disappear. A lake could hide a vehicle. A facility could hide a name. A polite man could hide control inside concern. And a report could hide the moment someone should have listened. Argus lifted his head, not sharply, not dramatically. He simply turned toward Foster, amber brown eyes catching the lamplight. Foster placed his hand on the dog's neck, feeling the warmth beneath the fur. That warmth was proof of something simple and stubborn. Argus had survived long enough to bring the question back. "I can't promise I'll bring her home," Foster said quietly. Argus did not move. "I can't promise Sadie won't hurt worse before this is done. I can't promise the system fixes itself just because we finally read the right line." The dog's nose touched the edge of Foster's wrist. Foster closed his eyes for 1 second. When he opened them, the clinic was still quiet. Snow tapped lightly against the glass. Somewhere far away beyond the town, beyond the lake, a woman named Eleanor Carrow might still be waiting behind another name. Foster rested his hand more firmly against Argus's collar. "But this time," he said, "I won't let the file close before the person is found." Haven Ridge Memory Residence looked gentle from the road. That was the first thing Foster Merrick noticed, even though he was not riding in the lead vehicle and was not in charge of the operation. The building sat back from a county road near the North Dakota line, surrounded by white fields, dark pines, and a split-rail fence half buried in snow. Its pale brick walls glowed softly in the morning light. Evergreen wreaths hung beneath the windows. A wooden sign near the driveway promised compassionate memory care in elegant gold letters. It looked like the kind of place families chose when they were tired, afraid, and desperate to believe polished brochures. Naomi Creel did not slow at the sign. 2 marked patrol vehicles from the county sheriff's office pulled in first. Behind them came Naomi's state vehicle, a van from Adult Protective Services, a health inspection unit, and an ambulance that waited near the entrance with its lights off. No one rushed. No one shouted. There was no drama for the cameras, because there were no cameras. That was how Naomi had planned it. Clean entry, preserve records, confirm patient identities, protect residents. Do not let anyone move a file or a person before the order was served. Foster stood beside Maris Ellery near the second vehicle. His dark navy police jacket zipped against the wind. He had been allowed to attend as the original recovery officer and timeline witness, but Naomi had made the boundary clear. He would not lead interviews. He would not handle records. He would not speak to Eleanor unless invited. It was harder than he expected. Across the parking lot, Sadie Carrow sat in Yvette Langley's clinic SUV, with both hands wrapped around a paper cup she had not touched. Yvette sat beside her, one hand on Argus's leash. The German Shepherd stood in the cargo area, black collar against his tan neck, ears alert, amber brown eyes fixed on the building. He did not bark. That made him seem more serious than if he had. Naomi stepped out of her vehicle and adjusted the small silver recorder clipped to her jacket. She looked at Foster once, not to ask permission, not to offer comfort, but to acknowledge the weight of his waiting. Then she walked to the entrance. The director of Havenridge met them in the lobby with a smile that lasted 1 second too long. Her name was Brenda Klein. She was in her early 50s, tall and narrow, with smooth blonde hair, shaped into a careful bob, and a navy dress that looked chosen to calm worried families. A small gold cross rested at her throat. Her voice was soft enough to sound kind until one noticed how quickly she moved to block the hallway. "Agent Creel," she said, eyes flicking toward the uniformed officers behind Naomi. "We would have appreciated notice." Naomi held out the order. That would have defeated the purpose. Brenda's smile thinned. The lobby smelled of disinfectant, cinnamon, and something sweet baking in a warmer. A fireplace played artificial flames behind glass. Framed photographs showed residents painting birdhouses, folding towels, and smiling at holiday parties. On the main floor, nothing looked hidden. Then Naomi asked for the second-floor medication room, patient index, intake binders, visitor restriction logs, and all records connected to a patient listed as E. Fenwick. Brenda stopped smiling. Foster watched from the lobby as the building changed without moving. Staff who had been wiping counters or carrying breakfast trays began to look at one another. A nurse at the reception desk reached toward a phone, then lowered her hand when a county deputy stepped beside her and calmly asked her not to make calls until instructed. The first-floor windows were large. The second-floor hallway was different. Foster was permitted to follow at a distance, while Naomi, an APS supervisor, and a health inspector went upstairs. The hallway narrowed. The carpet changed from pale blue to a duller gray. Doors had small coated panels. The air was warmer but felt less alive. No one had opened a window in a long time. The health inspector, a compact man named Peter Salas with tired eyes and a clipboard hugged to his chest, paused at the medication cart. His face did not change much, but Foster saw the tiny tightening around his mouth. Naomi noticed too. "Later?" she asked. Peter nodded once. "Soon." Room 214 was near the end of the hall. The nameplate beside the door read E. Fenwick. Naomi knocked first. No one answered. She opened the door slowly. The room was small, clean, and too empty. A bed, a chair, a dresser. A framed print of a lake that was not Lake Alderwake. No quilt, no sewing basket, no family photographs. Nothing that said a person had lived 61 years before being placed inside those walls. A woman sat in the chair by the window. Eleanor Carrow was alive. She was thinner than the photographs in the missing person file. Her hair, once brown and silver, had been brushed flat and clipped back without personality. Her cardigan was pale gray, buttoned wrong at the bottom. Her hands rested in her lap, one thumb rubbing the other as if trying to remember work it used to know. Naomi stepped in first, lowering her voice. "Mrs. Carrow?" The woman did not respond. Naomi tried again. "Eleanor?" Something moved behind the woman's eyes. Not recognition, not yet. But the name reached her. Foster stayed in the hallway, every muscle tight with the effort of not entering. He had seen people found after long searches before. There was usually noise, crying, relief, questions thrown too quickly at someone too fragile to catch them. Naomi did not do that. She crouched near the chair, leaving space between them. "My name is Naomi. I'm here to make sure you are safe. Do you know where you are?" Eleanor looked toward the window. "They said winter was easier if I stopped asking." Naomi's face stayed calm. "Who said that?" Eleanor's fingers tightened. "I asked for Sadie." At that name, Foster looked back down the hall toward the stairs. Sadie was still outside, still waiting because Naomi had insisted the first contact be controlled, gentle, and documented. Naomi asked, "Do you know Argus?" The change was immediate. Eleanor's mouth trembled. Her eyes filled before any sound came. "My dog," she whispered. The words moved through Foster like a door opening in a house that had been locked for months. The records told the rest of the first truth. Not all of it, not yet, but enough. In the administrative office, boxes were placed on the conference table and copied under supervision. Intake notes listed Gideon Carrow as Eleanor's health representative. A capacity letter signed by Leland Strake described her as unreliable, suspicious, and prone to false claims about property. A communication restriction advised staff that contact with Sadie Carrow could increase agitation. Naomi read that line once and set it aside carefully. Adriana Wells joined by video, her face calm but her eyes sharp behind copper-framed glasses. She identified the revocation document from the SUV, the appointment Eleanor had scheduled, and the notes about the lake property. She did not exaggerate. That made her more powerful. Mrs. Carrow had taken steps to challenge the authority being used here, Adriana said. She was not simply drifting away from family contact. Brenda Klein folded her hands on the table. We acted on the documents provided. Peter Salas looked up from the medication sheet. And you never questioned why the daughter was restricted without a court order. Brenda's expression hardened. Families in crisis are complicated. Naomi said, that is why records are supposed to be clearer than fear. Before the first round of review was finished, Gideon arrived. He came in a black overcoat with an attorney beside him, a slim man carrying a leather portfolio and the expression of someone paid not to be surprised. Gideon did not storm. He did not raise his voice. He stood in Haven Ridge's warm lobby with snow melting from his shoes and sorrow arranged across his face. My wife is not well, he said. This spectacle cannot help her. Naomi met him near the reception desk. You are not to approach Eleanor Carrow while we review the authority documents. Gideon looked past her and saw Foster near the wall. For one brief moment, the polished sadness slipped. You, Gideon said softly. Of course. Foster did not answer. Gideon turned back to Naomi. Sergeant Merrick has influenced this entire matter. He has encouraged my stepdaughter's grief, elevated an animal's behavior into evidence, and built suspicion from misunderstanding. Naomi's voice stayed even. Sergeant Merrick is not directing this operation. He started it. No, Naomi said. The documents did. That quiet answer landed harder than anger would have. Gideon's attorney began to speak about medical authority, privacy, and civil liability. Naomi let him finish. Then she informed Gideon that he was barred from contact pending review, that financial and placement records were being secured, and that he would need to provide all documents related to Eleanor's admission, property authority, and payments made on her behalf. Gideon's hand moved to the silver signet ring on his right hand. He twisted it once. Foster saw it and understood that even the men who controlled every word still needed somewhere to put fear. Eleanor was moved that afternoon to a supervised rehabilitation center under medical observation. Sadie was not allowed to rush into her arms in the hallway. The first meeting happened in a quiet room with Naomi, a nurse, and a social worker present. Foster stood outside the interior window beside Yvette. Sadie entered slowly. She had imagined this moment too many ways. Foster could see that in how carefully she held herself. She did not fall on her mother. She did not demand recognition. She sat in the chair across from Eleanor and placed both hands open on her knees. Mom, she said, it's Sadie. Eleanor looked at her daughter's face, then at her hands, then at the little silver scissors pendant at her throat. Her lips parted. No sound came. Sadie's eyes filled, but she smiled anyway. That's okay. I'm here. Eleanor looked frightened by her own slowness. Sadie leaned forward, not too close. You don't have to remember everything right now. You just have to let me sit with you. Something in Foster's chest tightened. That was not a rescue speech. That was love learning not to demand proof. After several minutes, Eleanor lifted one trembling hand. Sadie took it gently, as if accepting something breakable and sacred. Then Yvette brought Argus to the door. The German shepherd stopped on the threshold. For the first time since Foster had known him, Argus looked uncertain, not afraid of the room, afraid of hope. His strong body had recovered some of its shape, but his legs still carried the exhaustion of the lake, the weeks of wandering, the long winter of waiting. Yvette loosened the leash without releasing it. Easy, she whispered. Eleanor turned her head. Her gaze found the dog. At first, her face remained clouded. Then her eyes sharpened with a pain so old and bright that Foster had to look down. Argus, she whispered. The dog moved, not fast, not dramatically. He crossed the room step by step, his nails clicking softly on the floor. He lowered his head and placed his dark muzzle on Eleanor's knee. Eleanor's hand found his right ear, the one that tipped outward at the end. Her fingers shook as they traced it, learning the shape again. My good boy, she said. You waited. Argus sat beside her chair like he had never belonged anywhere else. Sadie covered her mouth with one hand, but she did not break. She kept holding Eleanor with the other. Foster stayed outside the glass. The moment was not his. He knew that. He had opened the door under the ice, but he had not been the one Argus waited for. He had found the question. He was not the answer. Then Argus looked over Eleanor's lap, through the glass, straight at him, just once. A quiet recognition, not gratitude, not goodbye. Only memory making room for the person who had helped it return. Foster nodded slightly. Inside the room, Eleanor leaned her cheek against Argus's head while Sadie held her hand. Outside, snow began falling again over the rehabilitation center, soft against the windows, bright against the dark road beyond. For the first time in months, Eleanor Carrow was no longer only a file, a maiden name, a patient number, or a woman someone had explained away. She was in the room. She was being called by her own name, and the dog who had found his way back to the frozen lake finally rested at her feet. The first thing Ashwater wanted was a clean ending. People wanted Gideon Carrow taken away in one scene, Eleanor Carrow restored in another, and every uncomfortable question placed neatly behind the word justice. The town wanted to believe the worst part was over, because Eleanor was alive. Foster Merrick knew better. Alive was not the same as returned. Found was not the same as healed. And a corrected file did not erase the months when a woman had been hidden beneath the wrong name, while everyone else learned to speak about her in the past tense. The investigation widened after Havenridge. Naomi Creel took the lead with the careful patience of someone who understood that big cases could collapse under dramatic hands. Gideon was charged with financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, document fraud, false statements connected to a missing person inquiry, obstruction of family contact, and conspiracy connected to the attempted transfer of Eleanor's lake property. The words sounded heavy when Naomi read them at the briefing. They still did not feel heavy enough. Leland Strake was not charged that same day. That frustrated half the town and frightened the other half. His evaluations were under review. His connection to other capacity letters, private care placements, and property transfers had to be traced one document at a time. Naomi said it plainly. Some people knowingly built the machine. Some people only handed it paper. We have to prove which is which. Foster stood at the back of the room and accepted the truth of that, even though part of him wanted certainty faster. Havenridge faced health inspections, licensing review, and possible charges tied to improper restrictions and incomplete authority documents. Some staff members cried during interviews. Some defended themselves. Some said they had only followed the forms given to them. Foster heard that sentence more than once. I only followed the forms. He no longer hated the sentence. He feared it, because it could be true and still leave damage behind. Pauline Mercer Shaw was found 6 days later in a smaller care home 2 counties away. She was alive, confused by the attention, and very angry that someone had donated her library card collection without asking. Her niece drove in from Wisconsin and cried so hard in the hallway that Pauline told her to stop being dramatic and bring her a decent sweater. That story traveled through the department like a little lamp. Margaret Duvane's case did not resolve so gently. Her property records were tied to the same development circle, but her location remained uncertain. There were leads, calls, and documents, but no immediate reunion. Naomi refused to call her case lost. She also refused to pretend hope was proof. Eleanor's recovery moved even slower. She did not return to the lake house right away. Sadie brought her to a rehabilitation apartment in Duluth with wide windows, soft rugs, and no locked doors. Some mornings Eleanor woke clear enough to remember the exact quilt pattern she had been designing before she disappeared. She would ask for blue fabric, then correct Sadie when the shade was too bright. Other afternoons, she asked the same question 3 times. Did Argus eat? Yes, Mom. Did Argus eat? Yes. Did I ask you that? Sadie learned to answer without letting heartbreak show every time. Argus made that easier. The German shepherd stayed near Eleanor's chair, no longer watching every door, with the fierce exhaustion of winter. His strong body filled out again with food, warmth, and sleep. The black saddle across his back shone after Yvette brushed the lake dullness from his coat. The small cream mark on his chest showed whenever he sat tall, like the candle Eleanor had once joked about. He did not belong to Foster. That had never been the point. Still, The first time Foster visited the rehabilitation apartment, Argus rose from beside Eleanor and crossed the room to him. The dog placed his muzzle against Foster's wrist, exactly where he had touched him after the rescue beneath the ice. Eleanor noticed. "He knows who opened the door," she said. Foster looked at her, unsure how much she remembered. Eleanor's eyes were tired but present. "I may forget names for a little while," she said. "I don't forget kindness when it has hands." Foster had no answer for that. He simply nodded and stepped aside as Argus returned to her. The court froze Gideon's authority over Eleanor's accounts and property. The lake land was placed back under Eleanor's control while the contested documents were reviewed. The resort proposal collapsed quietly at first, then publicly when donors and investors began asking which signatures had been real and which had only looked real enough. Gideon's name disappeared from thank you banners faster than anyone admitted. Foster did not enjoy that. He had expected to. Some bitter part of him had wanted the town to feel embarrassed for believing the polished man in the expensive coat. But when people looked away from Gideon's former office window or whispered outside the diner, Foster did not feel victory. He felt the cost of convenience. Ashwater had not hidden Eleanor alone. Gideon had driven the lie. Leland had dressed it in professional language. Havenridge had accepted it. But the town had also benefited from the comfort of not questioning too hard. A woman had been difficult to explain. So people accepted the explanation. 3 weeks after Eleanor was found, Chief Maris Ellery called Foster into her office. The snow outside had softened into rain, then frozen again along the sidewalks. Her glasses lay on the open file in front of her. Foster recognized his own name on the tab. "The review of Gideon's complaint is closed," Maris said. Foster stood behind the chair. "And no violation in your handling of the SUV search. No evidence of misconduct in your contact with Sadie Carrow. The complaint is marked unfounded." He waited for relief. It did not come in the way he expected. Maris looked at him for a long moment. The promotion board met before that conclusion came back. "Your name is not moving forward this year." There it was. Not a punishment anyone would call punishment. Not an injury anyone could photograph. Just a door left closed because someone had written doubt around his name long enough. Foster looked toward the window. "I figured. I can appeal the timing." "No." Maris frowned. "Foster." "No," he said again, softer this time. "Don't spend the fight there." Her expression changed. "Then where?" He pulled a folded copy from inside his jacket. It was the old Pursuit Review, the one from 18 months ago. He had read it the night after Eleanor's reunion with Argus, sitting alone at his kitchen table, while the wind moved snow against the glass. For months he had wanted 4 words removed. Not objected clearly, he had wanted the file cleaned. Now he slid the paper across Maris's desk. "I don't want the bad line erased," he said. "I want the missing warning added. Full language. Timestamp. Radio log. My statement that the road conditions exceeded safe continuation." Maris looked down at the paper, then back at him. "That may make the department look worse." "Yes." "You understand what you're asking?" "I'm asking for the file to stop protecting everyone from the part that matters." For the first time in years, speaking about that night did not feel like begging to be believed. It felt like placing weight where weight belonged. Maris put on her glasses and read the marked sections. Then she nodded once. "I'll file the amendment request." Foster left her office lighter and more exposed at the same time. Spring arrived slowly in northern Minnesota. It did not burst. It negotiated. Snowbanks shrank from the roadsides. Dark water appeared along the edge of Lake Alderwake. The ice began to crack in pale lines that caught the morning sun, not violently, not all at once, but with the quiet insistence of something that had been held too long finally making room to move. By April, Eleanor and Sadie announced what they planned to do with the lake property. They would not sell it. They would not build a resort. They would convert the old carriage house near the shoreline into a small advisory center for families dealing with power of attorney, guardianship petitions, capacity evaluations, and elder financial control. Adriana Wells agreed to visit twice a month. Naomi connected them with a state victim services network. Yvette offered to bring Argus on open house days, though everyone knew Argus would bring himself if Eleanor went. Eleanor named it Beacon House. At the dedication, She stood with one hand on Sadie's arm and the other resting on Argus's head. She spoke slowly, sometimes searching for a word, sometimes finding a better one than the word she had lost. "People think being hidden means no one can see you," she said. "Sometimes being hidden means people see a version of you that is easier for them. Sick, confused, difficult, gone." She looked toward the lake. A beacon does not drag anyone home. It only keeps shining long enough for someone to know where to look. No one clapped right away. That was good. Some words needed space before applause. Foster stood near the edge of the porch in uniform, holding an envelope from the Ashwater Police Association. It contained a donation small enough not to be impressive and honest enough to matter. He waited until the speeches ended. Sadie found him first. She looked steadier now, not untouched. Never that, but steadier. "Mom wants to see you." Foster walked to the sunny side of the porch. Eleanor sat in a wooden chair with a quilt over her lap. The quilt was unfinished at one corner. Loose threads waited for hands that were still relearning patience. Argus lay beside her, eyes half closed, his black and tan coat warm in the spring light. When he saw Foster, Argus stood. His rear legs were strong again, though the memory of the lake seemed to live in the careful way he rose. He crossed the porch and placed his muzzle against Foster's wrist, the exact place. Foster bent and ran his hand over the dog's head, thumb brushing the right ear that tipped outward. "Hey, Argus." The dog held there a moment, then looked back at Eleanor. Foster followed his gaze. This time she was there, not in a file, not under a maiden name hidden in a medical bill, not reduced to someone else's explanation. There, in the sun under a quilt, beside her daughter, with her dog choosing her again in front of everyone. Foster swallowed once. "This time," he said quietly to Argus, "she's here." Argus returned to Eleanor and lay at her feet. He did not follow Foster to the steps. That was right. Foster stepped off the porch and stood near the rail, looking down toward Lake Alderwake. The ice had broken into floating plates along the shore. Between them, dark water breathed in narrow spaces. Behind him, Eleanor laughed at something Sadie said. The laugh was thin, a little surprised, but real. Foster had not gotten the promotion. Eleanor had not gotten back every stolen month. Sadie had not been spared the memory of believing the worst. Margaret Duvain was still a question on Naomi's board. The ending was not clean, but the file had been rewritten by someone alive enough to object. And for Foster Merrick, that was the difference between a closed case and a truthful one. He took the silver compass keychain from his pocket, turned it once in his palm, and let it go. Then he stepped back onto the porch, not as the man who saved the day, not as the man who kept the dog, but as one more witness to a woman finally being allowed to stand inside her own name. Sometimes the truth does not return with noise. Sometimes it comes back quietly. Through a name spoken again, a door finally opened, or a loyal dog who refuses to forget the person everyone else stopped looking for. May this story remind us that no life is too hidden for grace, and no honest cry is too small for God to hear. In our own lives, may we be brave enough to ask one more question, listen one more time, and stand beside those whose voices have been written out. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us where you're watching from, and please like, share, and subscribe for more stories of loyalty, justice, and hope. May peace be with you and your family.